All right, let's dive into a story that is all about transformation. We're talking about a journey from being absolutely crippled by fear to finding this incredible world-changing faith. So let me just ask you this right off the bat. Have you ever had one of those moments where fear just takes over? Where you feel small, hidden, and totally, completely incapable of facing what's in front of you. If that sounds familiar, well, you are definitely not alone. Because that's the exact spot where we meet the guy at the center of our story today, a man named Gideon. So let's set the stage here. We're going to look at this idea of paralyzing fear, but also at this hidden strength. The kind that's buried so deep, you might not even know it's there. Okay, so when we first meet Gideon, picture this. He's not some hero on a battlefield. He is literally hiding in a hole in the ground, a wine press, trying to smack some wheat around in secret so his enemies, the Midianites, don't see him and steal his food. This image just says everything, doesn't it? He's trapped physically and emotionally by his fear. And this is what's so wild. There's this massive disconnect, right? On one hand, Gideon's reality is all about hiding, feeling weak, thinking he's from the least important family around. But then, this completely different vision is spoken over him. He's called a mighty warrior with this huge purpose. It's like two totally different worlds are colliding. And that clash, that shocking difference between what he sees and what's possible, well, that sets us up for the big turning point, an unbelievable call to action that's about to change absolutely everything. And here it is. This is the line. Just try to put yourself in his shoes for a second. You're in a pit, probably covered in dirt, totally terrified, and an angel shows up and calls you a mighty warrior. You'd think it was a joke, right? But it wasn't. This was the spark. It was a challenge to see himself in a whole new light. It really gets you thinking, What if that thing you're most afraid of, the area where you feel like you just don't measure up, what if that's the exact place where your real strength is just waiting to be discovered? But listen, this wasn't like flipping a switch. His journey from being terrified to having this incredible faith, well, it was a process. It happened one step at a time. And when you look closely, you can actually see the roadmap. First, he has to challenge how he sees himself, to accept this new identity. Then, and this is key, he has to act even when he's still full of doubt. And finally, the whole thing forces him to rely on a strength that is way beyond his own. And check this out. This is a perfect example of that second step. Gideon's first big mission, it's not to go fight a giant army. It's to sneak out at night, because he's still scared, and tear down these old altars in his town. It seems small, but it was that first crucial step away from his fear and into who he was called to be. So all of this is building up to a climax that honestly feels completely backwards. The whole story flips, and we start to see this crazy idea, winning by surrendering. So Gideon gets his act together and raises an army to face the Midianites. And he does pretty well. He gets 32,000 guys to sign up. From a normal military perspective, you're thinking, okay, we've got a real shot. Things are finally looking up. And just when you think he's got a handle on things, bam, he gets this message. You have too many men. Too many. The reason is just mind-blowing. If they win with a huge army, they'll think they did it themselves. The victory had to be so impossible that no one else could take the credit. So the army gets whittled down. First, anyone who's scared gets sent home. Then there's another test. And what's he left with? 300 men. 300 guys against an enemy that the text says was like a swarm of locusts. I mean, the odds aren't just bad, they are laughably impossible. And that's the point, isn't it? This is where the story completely redefines what strength even means. It's not about numbers. It's not about your own abilities. Real transformation and real victory, that comes from trust and obedience, especially when it makes zero logical sense. So, okay, great story. But what does this have to do with you and me right now? Well, that brings us to the most important part, what we can call your Gideon moment. Let's pull all these threads together. What this story really hammers home is that who you are is not defined by your fear. It shows us that real, lasting change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process built on tiny acts of courage, like tearing down an altar in the dark. And maybe most importantly, it shows that our greatest strength often shows up when we finally let go, when we surrender, and that's what opens the door to the biggest victories. So we'll leave you with this thought. Gideon's story started in a wine press, a place of hiding. It's such a perfect picture of where we go when we're afraid. So the question for you is pretty simple. What fear is keeping you in your wine press? And what's the one small, brave step you could take to start climbing out?